You used to be the one who texted first, who made the plans, who kept the connection alive. And then one day you just stopped. And here's what nobody tells you. The silence didn't feel like freedom. It felt like grief. Because when you stopped reaching out, you didn't discover who cared. You discovered something worse. That most of your relationships were built on your effort alone. And the people you thought were your friends, they never even noticed you were gone. Which means you were never really there to begin with. This isn't about ghosting people. This isn't about playing games or being petty. This is about people who gave and gave and gave until they had nothing left to give. Who were always the initiator, always the one maintaining the friendship, always the one putting in effort while everyone else just received. And one day they realized, what if I stop? What if I let the other person reach out for once? What if I see who actually values this connection enough to maintain it? So they stopped, and the silence was deafening. Not because people were angry, but because people didn't notice. And that silence answered the question they've been too afraid to ask. Was I the only one who cared about this relationship? But here's the part that messes you up. Even when you know the answer, you still hope you're wrong. So what leads someone to stop reaching out? It starts with exhaustion. Deep, bone-tired, emotional exhaustion from being the only one trying. You're always the one who texts first, who suggests plans, who asks how they're doing, who remembers birthdays, who checks in during hard times. And at first, you don't mind. You're a good friend. You care. You like connecting. But then you start noticing. They never initiate. They respond when you reach out. Sure. But if you don't text, radio silence. If you don't make plans, nothing happens. If you don't check in, they don't wonder where you went. And slowly it hits you. This relationship only exists because you make it exist. You're not a friend. You're a convenience. Someone who provides connection, support, entertainment when they want it, but who they never think about when you're not actively in front of them. And that realization, it's devastating because you thought it was mutual. You thought they cared as much as you did. But the one-sided effort tells a different story. And eventually, that imbalance becomes too heavy to carry. So you decide to test it. Not maliciously, not as a game, but because you need to know, if I stop being the glue holding this together, will it fall apart? Do they actually want me in their life? Or do they just like that I'm convenient? You stop texting first. Stop making plans. Stop being the one who maintains the connection. And you tell yourself you're not keeping score. You're just seeing what happens. And what happens is usually one of three things. Option 1, nothing. Days turn into weeks. Weeks turn into months. And you never hear from them. Not because you fought, not because anything happened, but because without you doing the work, the relationship simply doesn't exist. They don't reach out. They don't wonder where you went. They just move on. And that tells you everything. Option 2, they reach out eventually, but only when they need something. Advice, a favor, entertainment, and you realize they don't miss you. They miss what you provided. The relationship was always transactional. You just didn't see it before. Option 3, they notice. They reach out. They ask if you're okay. They make effort, and you want to feel relieved. But instead you feel angry. Because if they could reach out now, why couldn't they before? Why did it take you disappearing for them to care? That silence you created? It didn't just reveal who cared. It revealed how little effort they were willing to give until they thought they might lose you. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because the truth isn't just that they didn't care enough. The truth is that you trained them not to. You were always available, always reaching out, always making it easy for them to put in zero effort. So they learned that they didn't have to try, that you'd always be there, that the relationship would continue no matter what they did or didn't do. And that's not entirely their fault. It's also yours. Not because you're a bad person, but because you never set the boundary. You never said, I need reciprocity. You just kept giving and hoping they'd notice, hoping they'd change, hoping they'd start caring as much as you did. But people don't rise to your unstated expectations. They sink to your demonstrated boundaries. And you had none. So now you're stuck, because you can't blame them for not meeting standards you never communicated. But you also can't keep accepting relationships that drain you. And that contradiction, that's what makes stopping so hard. You're not just grieving the friendship. You're grieving the version of yourself who thought being endlessly available was the same as being valued. And then there's the guilt. Multiple kinds, all of them heavy. There's guilt for stopping, for not texting first, for letting the friendship fade, even though you know rationally it shouldn't be your job alone. But there's also guilt for staying so long, for accepting so little, for training people to treat you like you don't matter, for being so desperate for connection that you tolerated one-sided relationships for years. And then there's the worst guilt, relief. Because part of you is glad you stopped, glad you're not carrying these relationships anymore, glad you don't have to wonder if they'll ever reciprocate. And feeling relieved about losing people you cared about, that makes you feel like a terrible person. So you're guilty for leaving, guilty for staying, and guilty for being glad it's over. There's no position that doesn't feel wrong. And maybe that's the real sign you needed to stop. When every option feels bad, but one of them at least feels honest. And when you stop reaching out, people reveal themselves quickly. The ones who care notice immediately. Within days, maybe a week, they reach out. Hey, haven't heard from you. Everything okay? They don't wait for you to do all the work. They step up. But the ones who don't care, they don't notice at all. Months can pass. You could disappear from their life completely, and they wouldn't even realize. Not because they hate you, but because you were never really on their radar. You were just there when convenient. And here's what's painful. Sometimes the people who don't notice are people you considered close friends. People you invested years in. People you thought would always be there. But their silence shows you that the relationship you thought you had was mostly in your head. This isn't about them being bad people. Most of them aren't. They're just not your people. They're comfortable with surface-level connection, with occasional contact, with convenience-based friendship. And you need something deeper, something mutual, something real. The silence reveals the mismatch. And while it hurts, it's also information. Because you deserve people who don't wait for you to do all the work, who value you enough to maintain the connection, who see you as worth the effort. But here's what no one tells you about stopping. It doesn't fix the problem. It just reveals it. Because yes, you freed yourself from one-sided relationships. Yes, you stopped overextending. Yes, you set a boundary. But now you're alone, or at least lonelier than you were before. And you have to sit with this question. Was it better to have surface-level friendships than no friendships? Was it better to have people who didn't care that much than to have no one at all? Everyone says quality over quantity. But what if you remove the quantity and you still don't have quality? What if stopping reaching out didn't lead to better relationships? What if it just led to fewer relationships? You thought stepping back would make space for the right people. But what if the right people never come? What if you're just alone now? With your standards, with your boundaries, with your self-respect, but alone. And that's the part they don't warn you about. That doing the right thing doesn't guarantee a happy ending. That sometimes you let go of people who weren't good for you, and no one better shows up to replace them. And you have to decide if being alone with your dignity is better than being connected without it. Most days you think it is, but some days you're not sure. So the question becomes, do you ever reach out again? After you've stopped, after the silence has revealed the truth, do you go back? Sometimes, yes. For the people who eventually stepped up, who realized they've been taking you for granted and made changes, who proved through consistent effort that they value you. Those relationships can be rebuilt, stronger because now they're balanced. But here's what's tricky. How long do you wait before deciding they're not going to reach out? A week? A month? 6 months? At what point does their silence become proof they don't care versus just proof they're bad at reaching out? Because some people do care. They're just terrible at showing it. They're not malicious. They're just thoughtless. And if you cut everyone off who's thoughtless, you might cut off everyone. So you're stuck again, between accepting less than you want and demanding more than they can give, between lowering your standards and being alone, between giving people grace and protecting your peace. There's no clean answer, just the uncomfortable reality that most relationships exist somewhere in the middle of what you want and what you're willing to accept. Here's what people who stop reaching out are looking for. Relationships where effort feels natural, where you're not keeping score because you don't need to, where both people want to show up, where you're valued, not tolerated. And those relationships do exist. You've probably seen them. Friends who check in on each other without reminders. Partners who share the emotional labor. Connections that feel reciprocal without anyone having to demand it. But here's the hard part. You can't force those relationships into existence. You can set boundaries. You can stop accepting less. You can make space. But you can't control who fills that space, or if anyone fills it at all. So you're faced with a choice. Keep reaching out to people who don't reach back and feel used. Or stop reaching out and risk being alone. And neither option is good. They're both just different versions of lonely. The only difference is that one version of lonely comes with self-respect. And maybe that has to be enough. Because the alternative, spending your life begging people to care about you, that's not connection. That's self-abandonment. And you've done enough of that already. If you're someone who stopped reaching out, you already know this isn't a success story. It's just a different kind of hard. You didn't magically find better people. You didn't suddenly feel complete. You just stopped tolerating relationships that made you feel like you didn't matter. And now you're sitting with the consequences of that choice. Some days it feels like freedom. Some days it feels like punishment. Most days it feels like both. But here's what you do know. You can't go back. You can't unsee what the silence revealed. You can't pretend those relationships were real when the evidence says otherwise. You can't keep being the only one trying and call it friendship. So you move forward. Not because you're sure it's better, but because staying would have destroyed you.